Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Welcome, everybody, for another very special podcast episode today. Special because we've got a special guest star joining me and Brett today.
I got to say, she's a natural performer.
She is.
So we are very fortunate to have an absolute natural performer.
So just like a lot of working parents, sometimes we have to work from home, and that is my situation today. And my 3-year-old daughter, Natalie, is here with us as we're recording.
Live in the studio.
Right in our studio. So she is so excited about singing. So Natalie.
We have a new intro song going.
I know, we got a good new intro song. So Natalie, what are we doing our topic on today for the podcast? Do you know? What did Mom bring for the podcast on the table?
Spoons and forks.
We have spoons and forks. And so we're talking about the spoon and the fork theory today. Yep.
And milk.
And milk?
Yeah.
And I guess and milk too.
Oh, good. Good. I hope to get some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I made my milk can.
Forks and spoons, not to be confused with forks over spoons, I think. Isn't that a Netflix documentary? But so what are we talking about? Forks and spoons? Why are we bringing forks and spoons in here?
All right. So we've got Natalie distracted for at least a little bit here, so we can talk more about our spoon and fork theories.
Spoon and fork. Are we going to be eating? I'm kind of excited. I love to eat. So are we eating, or what are we doing with forks and spoons today?
I literally grabbed some sporks and sporks. Forks and spoons out of the kitchen here. Actually, I did have a client when I was telling him about fork and spoon theory, and he asked me, is there a spork theory too? I was like, I don't know. That'd be great.
How dialectical of him. I love that. Blending the two together. What a balance.
But I definitely know fork and spoon theory. And I think they're really great theories to talk about with clients. And so I just wanted to share them and talk about them a little bit more on the podcast today. So let's kind of dig into this idea of even just starting first with the fork theory. So fork theory is a really great way to think about the amount of stress we can all tolerate at one time. So it could vary so much day to day. It can vary from person to person. How much do I feel like I can take on, handle, and tolerate? And it really relates to that common phrase, stick a fork in me, I'm done.
I love that phrase too. I just don't use it very often because I think of a book many years ago. It's called The Addictions America Applauds. And one of the addictions was workaholism, guilty as charged. I love to work, and I don't know if I'm addicted to it, but I love it. And it's hard to know, when am I done? It's hard to figure that out. So are you going to help us determine that? Okay, great.
Well, even just starting to, what I love about it, working with clients when it's a new way to reconceptualize the amount of stress that we're dealing with. And I think give ourselves a lot of empathy for when I have hit that point, that stick a fork in me, I am done. It's because if we think about the fork theory, it helps us to think about it in a way of, I literally have too many forks in my body right now, too many forms of stress in which I'm dealing with. And so that's where it's like I pull out some forks, some big forks, some little forks. I've got them in my hand right now. And if I think about them as like all these different types of stress in my body, big ones to represent the big forms of stress, little ones to represent the little forms. And every single one is one that I'm dealing with and kind of carrying around with throughout the day. That can feel so overwhelming for so many of my clients. And when I like to think about it with this theory, it's like sometimes we don't have to deal with the big forks right now, right? If there's a big form of stress in our life, it's going to feel like quite a bit that we're going to have to deal with and handle. But what if instead of the big fork, we could find a little fork that we could work on pulling out and tackling and addressing instead?
I really like this because it kind of reminds me in sports. Michael Jordan sometimes, when he couldn't score, he just went cold. He couldn't score. They would devise a very easy play for him to make a basket, just to sort of say, okay, that was an easy one. You're getting going again. Is that sort of what we're talking about? Just trying to get some traction again because we're. Yeah, okay, I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about like big forks and little forks, I can think about the things that, even when I work with a lot of clients on, they are stressed out because their room's a mess and they know they have to clean their room. And that can feel like such a big fork to have to tackle. That sometimes I like to talk to them about things like, well, what about just like the 5-minute rule, which can make it feel like now I just have a small fork to deal with. So 5-minute rule would say, hey, what is something that is in my room that's going to be a small piece of it that I could tackle and do for just 5 minutes? Maybe it's just sorting my laundry. That's going to be a small fork rather than the big fork of I have to do my entire room all at once, which might be a little too much for me right now.
That's a great point. And I was just thinking about this today because I was really tired, having a hard time getting going. And I make the bed, and I looked at the bed, and I could feel some sort of dopamine release, like, hey, I got something done. And I did hear years ago of a study that many successful leaders do is they all make the bed first thing in the morning. And the idea is just what you're talking about. We check, and I don't know, I get some endorphin release just by doing that. It sort of reminds me of physics, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Absolutely. It's going to feel so much easier once in relief when I did something, whether maybe it's for just 5 minutes, that was able to help me pull out one, even if it was just the tiniest little fork out. Now, suddenly I've got a breath of fresh air. I've got a little bit of relief. And that's going to start to give me the energy and the ability to say, okay, maybe now I can start to work on some of those bigger forks that are stuck right now, even if I can just start to get them loose. Again, it's just a new way of conceptualizing, thinking about stress and getting away from, I think that, we start to get into this period of like learned helplessness sometimes. All the forks are too much. And I'm just thinking about them in mass as one large thing that then I just kind of feel helpless and there's nothing I can do. And it's about finding a new way to kind of learn to not only just to cope, but to, again, break down those stressors. Maybe it doesn't have to be everything in one mass. Maybe we can start to identify the little pieces that we can start to pull out and work on and do instead.
It gives new understanding to how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time or one forkful at a time, maybe you might say.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a little bit on the fork theory. And then I like to talk about the spoon theory and then how they kind of fit together. Spoon theory. So I've got my spoons here with me. It's really neat. So this one comes from a woman named Christine. Christine was sitting in a diner with her friend years and years ago. And Christine had lupus, so a chronic illness. And so this really relates for a lot of clients dealing with chronic mental health concerns, chronic illness, chronic pain. And in her case, it was lupus. And her friend was sitting with her with a diner, and Christine's trying to explain to her why it is that she's got so little energy as part of her illness and why it's hard to do things for herself or for other people at times. And I think her friend kind of wasn't getting the concept quite. So Christine did what I'm doing right now, which is she picked up a bunch of spoons right off of that diner table. And she said, here's how I want you to think about this. The spoons represent the total amount of energy that I have to spend throughout the day. Every little task that I do is going to spend a spoon For example, for me, maybe just brushing my teeth, I'm going to spend a spoon. Taking a shower, I'm going to spend a spoon. Eventually, I'm spending all of my spoons throughout the day. And I think with chronic illness and pain and mental health concerns, we tend to have a more limited amount of spoons, maybe, with somebody who isn't struggling. So I've got a very limited number. And sometimes by the end of the day, I have to choose where I'm going to spend my spoon. Is it going to be cooking myself dinner? Or is it going to be another task that I'm going to have to do, like take my medication? Sometimes I have to pick and choose. And it's about, again, another way of reconceptualizing and also helping both like our clients and other people to really kind of understand and develop some of that empathy and understanding of this is why when I get to the end of my day, and so many of us have experienced this at some point or another, I'm done. I have spent all my spoons.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I know a number of clients and people who have lupus, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, MS, things like that. And you can look at them and they, on the outside, they look fine. And people have no idea what is going on, what it takes just to get through a day. Another analogy could be, most people might have, when they start the day, it's kind of like your phone, it's fully charged and you got enough to get through the day. And could you imagine, like, when maybe this has happened where you start your day and your phone wasn't plugged in fully all night, and so you only have 20% battery for the whole day.
Yes.
And you get a little bit of anxiety, but that's just for your phone. But I think for people who are struggling with these kinds of illnesses and diseases, it produces a lot of anxiety. How am I going to get through the day? And so a lot of times anxiety accompanies this. And I really like what you're saying too, because for people to take some control of their life, because we feel like I don't have any control over this, but we do have a control over, okay, how am I going to take even this 20%? How am I going to spend this and prioritize how I do my day? So I think this is really empowering for people that feel really powerless due to all these kinds of illnesses.
I love to share this with my clients when they come in and both of us know you're just having one of those days or one of those weeks. I feel like a lot of clients kind of get stuck in this. Why should the shoulds, right? Which we hate on this podcast. Yeah. Why shouldn't I be doing more? I should expect myself to do more. And it's like, but of course, look at everything else that you're dealing with, whether it's the forks or the limited number of spoons. That is what's causing you to feel this way. And actually having that conversation and calling it out that way, it just brings relief for so many of my clients to realize, wait, I am putting these higher expectations and standards on myself that, of course, I would never put on somebody else, especially if I knew everything that they were going through, just like I'm going through today or this week.
Right. And they have to be very assertive, very upfront with people, because we do form judgments. And with those judgments, we have expectations on other people. So, for instance, people who have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, lupus, things like that, if they were in a wheelchair, it would be very obvious for people to see, oh, okay, I need to, and I'm glad to make some accommodations. But people with lupus, and for that matter, even people struggling with depression, we think that people with depression are just kind of Eeyore all the time, but they can be smiling and looking great on the outside, and yet they're struggling, and they have like 10% battery left, or they have just that last spoon, and they're struggling. So
these are invisible illnesses.
Right, right. And so I love what you're saying. They really need to advocate for themselves. They need to be assertive and say, hey, this is what's going on for me, just to let you know. And I've seen people who do that, and others are saying, oh, I had no idea. So I really appreciate that. I hope people who are listening feel a bit empowered if they have this kind of illness, or if they know somebody who has this kind of illness, so that they can maybe take some initiative and say, how you doing? How you feeling today? Where are you at?
Yeah. And even if you don't have one of these illnesses, but you've just experienced this yourself, again, a new way to think about it, to have that compassion for yourself, to have compassion for others, and to think too, like I always like to kind of encourage people when we're thinking about the forks, the stressors that we have, and the limited spoons that we have, to even think about too, like I can think about how I want to spend those and what would feel good with spending those spoons. Sometimes it'd be so worth it to me to spend a spoon right now to pull out a small fork. Right. And to think about too, like I was, again, just having a discussion with a client about where are you spending your spoons? Sometimes you're spending them on things that aren't helpful for you. What if we were to conserve those and spend them on things like pulling out some of these forks that we know are going to make you feel so much better?
So many thoughts going in my head. This is so good because I think we need a better understanding what recreation means.
Yeah.
Because if you think of the word recreation, it means recreate. But how many times have we gone on a vacation and we come back absolutely depleted? We say, boy, I now need another week just to recover, or it took me a week just to sort of relax. And it really illustrates this broader concept that we're talking about, which is really self-care. And I never knew what self-care was. People would always ask me, Brett, are you taking care of yourself? Like, and they're asking me, are you doing good self-care? I had no idea. I'm like, self-care? Fridays I watch a movie and have a pizza and drink Mountain Dew and I feel great. But it's so much more than that. And we kind of applaud people that are busy, that have a lot that they have to get done. And
hustle culture.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so this whole idea, we need to be talking more about self-care. And I probably need to have an expert that I listen to because I'm not very good at it still. I'm working on it, but I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things too, where it's so funny when we say self-care and we talk about it. We tend to, as therapists, when we do job interviews, people tend to ask us, how do you do self-care? Do you know how much I wish like more industries would do that as well too? I think it's just questions we should all be asking ourselves all the time. How do you engage in self-care? What's going to help you? And what I really, really like, that's a really positive thing that comes out of this fork and spoon theory, is that with the forks, you're not alone. Like that's where therapy helps, is sometimes therapists can help you with taking out those forks and you don't have to do that on your own. Or sometimes we can ask for help from our family members. Hey, I really need this help today, and this would actually help to pull out a big fork for me right now, if you could help me with that. Even to like the idea of the spoons. If my spoons are spent by the end of the day, guess what? Really good night's sleep. I'm going to get all those spoons back for tomorrow. I think there's a lot of positive things in there and reassurances for a lot of people too.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see the forks within people. If we did, right, you could
Let
see,
me get that for you. Yeah.
Michelle, I noticed, man, you've got a lot of forks. You know, you got forks everywhere coming out of you.
I do.
And we, someone could see that in me, and I could say, yeah, I'm all forked. Forked up, maybe you could say.
But I
don't know if you can we say that on the podcast? But
we're forked up.
It is. Yeah, it's really, that visual would really help us and others be able to gauge better, because really we don't know how to gauge ourselves. And I know the first car I ever bought a long time ago was a Honda Accord. I paid $500 for it. I was pretty excited. First car. And I drove it up to school about an hour and a half. I started to drive it back, and I saw this red light go on. I know nothing about cars. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. And I just kept on driving. Then I saw some smoke coming out of the hood. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And, it's fine. I ignored it, and I kept on going. Well, I overheated the car. I had it for a week. I melted the engine. I needed it towed. And I had gauges that were speaking to me, and I didn't know enough to pay any attention to it. And so individually, I have gauges too. And what you're saying is, we have all these forks in us that are telling us we're done. And when we ignore it, we're going to get in trouble. We're going to have problems. We're going to burn out. We're going to have illnesses and things of that nature.
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think some of those gauges are for us? How do I know if I have too many forks in me that I need to expend some spoons to extract some forks? What are those gauges, Michelle?
I think it's a lot of those moments in which we're feeling, I've seen where it's like a lot of increased irritability when you're just so run down and exhausted. When you're having moments where even like if we're already dealing with like anxiety and depression symptoms and we're seeing like especially one of those spikes in it and I don't understand why and I'm not sure what's happening, it's well worth taking a look at what's going on with those forks and spoons. And when can I get maybe some help and support from others, whether it's therapist or friends and family? That's why I love fork and spoons, because it's such a nice, simple way, as long as the other person knows what that means, to clue somebody else in on here's what's going on with me and here's what would help me so much.
Right. And I think we need to listen to other people. At my clinic here, I think last week, 2 weeks ago, I had 6 different people on different occasions all come up and say to me, hey, you doing okay? You just look a little tired.
Look a little tired. Really, I love that comment.
I'm thinking, I'm fine, and I realized, I haven't gotten enough sleep. I've been working extra hard. And I also realized I hadn't laughed in a while. And we have our episode on Is Laughter the Best Medicine? Yes. And I firmly believe it's great. And so listening to other people is a great way to know how maybe I get too many forks in me. I got to pay attention to my spoons. And I also think our emotions are gauges for us too. Yes. We judge our emotions as good or bad. And yet they're just an indicator light for us that a lot of times we ignore and we just dismiss, especially the ones we think are negative. And I think that gets us in trouble too, where if we ignore what our emotions are actually communicating to us, then we're going to run into all sorts of problems. Absolutely.
So, I thought it would be a nice concept to share with everyone. It's so helpful when we think about invisible illnesses, but also just for everyone as well too, and things to think about. And we really appreciate your time listening to us today and listening to the background noises of my dog and my daughter, who is so excited to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to all of you today.
Well, it's been fun. I want to say you have a number of forks in you right now as you're trying to balance work, podcast, being at home as mom. And I can recognize that. I really hope too, Michelle, that as we have talked about this, every time it's such a great object lesson, we use forks and spoons all the time. And maybe when we see those forks and spoons that we're using to eat, we are mindful and ask ourselves, where am I with my spoons and energy I have? How many forks do I have in me? And we can think about people maybe we're judging and maybe asking what is wrong with them, and start to ask, I wonder what's going on with them. Maybe they got all forks going on right now. Yeah. Even if all my spoons get spent today, which I have a feeling they will, I'll have more tomorrow. Thanks for sharing this, Michelle. Yeah. Thank you all for joining and listening for today.
Tinkle, tinkle. It's not working.
It's working.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.